Excited to be here with you guys, here with Dr. Tim Holler and Jason Holtgrewe, members of our team here at Kardia Collective, where we exist to help you live with courage, hope, and freedom. Three very specific outcomes that we hope come from a result of your own healing and growth and development. So I love asking these guys hard questions and letting them put their experience and training to the test. But a thing that seems to come up often with me and men specifically that I may know or are coaching is it is not uncommon for me to hear them make a statement that sounds something like this. And they would say, well, my wife and I don't have sex very often. And so, of course, that makes it more difficult for me to not look at pornography. So the premise is because my wife is not having sex with me, that pornography is more tempting. So I would love to get you guys to weigh in on that. And the other part of that question I would probably put before you is sex a legitimate need? So easy toss-up question. Take it away.
Go, Jason.
I was about to say, go, Tim.
I knew you were. I would just beat you to it. Man, that's hard. I can tell you before, we even start to address the answer to the question, if there is such an answer, but is that I can relate to that struggle. Personally, I've been married for 42 years, almost 43. And I've made that argument myself. So I hear that. So I know that tension inside. I know that feeling inside, that temptation and that going back and forth and trying to understand why I do what I do. Why would I look at porn, or why would I lust? Why would I look outside of my marriage? And so one of the reasons that I concluded, as I try to make sense out of myself, is because my wife isn't forthcoming enough, if you will. And so, and that drive, sex drive, the drive for sex, that drive for that experience is so strong in us that it feels like the same feeling we have when we haven't had something to eat for a long time, so we're very hungry, or we haven't had something to drink for a long time, so we're very thirsty. We experience it the same way, and so I just want to say that at the front end, it feels similar.
So at the foundationally. What I hear you saying foundationally is the drive for sex is similar to that craving for food. How would you, is that a compulsion? Is that or that's just how would you describe that?
Well, but that's where the analogy breaks down.
Right.
Because the truth is, after a while, if you don't get food or oxygen or water, you will perish. You won't survive. The truth about sex, however, is with a sex act, a sex experience, is you will not die. There's a comic and episode or narrative that if a man, particularly, that's the stereotype, goes a long time without sex, he's maybe trapped on a desert island by himself, and then he gets back to civilization, all he can do is think about where can he find a woman with whom he can have sex, or get back to his wife, whatever. And they're going, man, he just can't wait, right? That's just not true. He's been away from women for 5 years. He hasn't had sex for 5 years. He can go another 5. That's the reality. The truth of the sex drive is that the more sex a person is having, the more they want, and the more they have a hard time not having sex. So as in terms of need, like I will die or I will not survive. It is not a need in the sense of other things that we need to live. But we can come back to that a little bit in terms of what we really mean by needs and what sex represents relationally in just a minute. I'd want to stop and let Jason step into that if he'd like to.
Yeah. I'm excited to hear what you have to share about that, Tim, about how it's a need, but not like the analogy does break down, like food and water.
Right.
And yet it still can be essential in its own way. Mm-hmm. So like you were saying, Shad, men will say, well, I'm not having sex with my wife, my partner, therefore this is my outlet. I deserve this. The issue with that is that pornography could be used as a way to avoid some really painful emotions and some hurt misunderstanding between two people, that sex could be the culmination, if you could put it that way, of a reconnection emotionally. But it's first facing whatever disconnect or whatever tension, conflict between the two people there are. And it could be more life existential things, just life is stressful, busy. How do we manage everything? How do we take time for one another? So it could be a conversation about that. Let's get practical here. How do we reconnect emotionally so that we can reconnect physically? Or it could be real resentment between two people, and sex hasn't occurred because there's not a feeling of safety, emotional safety maybe from one partner or maybe from both partners. And it's true, engaging in a difficult conversation like, hey, what you did or what you said, that really hurt me. And the other person's like, well, I didn't mean it that way. And then that can begin a conversation of, well, this is how I understood it. And this is how I felt hurt. And it stirred up fears in me. And I felt like I was failing you. And that may not be like this 1 + 1 = 2. Now we're going to have sex now because we've had this conversation, but it could be a way of really reconnecting and trusting one another, which could culminate in sexual connection. And so just saying, you know what, I haven't had sex in a couple weeks with my wife, my partner. I'm just going to look at porn because my partner's denying me. Well, that's not fair. Like there's more going on, and we owe it to ourselves not to just to have a physical release, but to do the hard work of relationships. And I have more to say about, getting into pornography and maybe some of the psychology of that, but we can revisit that.
Yeah, I want to. It opens up a lot of doors, right? So number one, let me say this. I specifically addressed it from a male perspective. Maybe there are females that have a similar, not to make it unique to, specific to males. So I primarily work with males and I'm around men. So that's where I've heard that argument made. And Jason, I think what part of what I've experienced myself in this process and hearing it is it's often in the pain of the felt rejection and the lack of sex that is then being treated through some other means, whether that's through lust, pornography, masturbation, etc. So it's like there's and you guys, I'd love for y'all to weigh in on that, but it seems like the use of something else, some other release, is not specific to the need or drive for sex as it is to the relief of the pain or the felt sense of rejection. So I don't know if that's a a clear enough question to respond to. I think you guys know what I'm getting at, but that's kind of a layer. And then I do think it's really valuable because Tim, you were the first one to say this to me, and I remember it just taking the wind out of my sails when you said that sex was not a need, and I was like, I don't like the sound of that. But the reality has been, and it's been such a freeing, that I'm not going to die in the absence of it. So it's just a really fascinating conversation. So can you maybe speak to that? What I would describe as the reactivity to the feeling I have when I am denied sexually, and then how I respond to that, and maybe some of those dynamics.
Yeah, and I think it helps to refer to other ways that we might find relief.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be alcohol, or it could be gambling, or it could be watching Netflix or whatever. I always pick on Netflix. I don't know why, but it could be any movie thing.
They're going to cancel you.
I know. Poor little Netflix.
I know,
right.
Maybe because we canceled them. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. It's just a way of finding relief from the pain, as you just described. And Jason, I thought you did a beautiful job of talking exactly of that other layer of why sex itself, as though the act, even though the act is not a need, it is in a marriage relationship, it is the fulfillment, an expression of the fulfillment of healthy intimacy. And it is not the only expression of that, but it is one of the what do we say? Maybe the greatest, or one of the most fulfilling.
Pretty powerful.
Yeah. And God made it that way. I think we were made for that. So, and when it's not there, that's when we feel that pain that you're talking about. But it isn't the act itself that produces the pain. It is the lack of connection. And I'm using synonymously connection with intimacy. So it's the lack of intimacy, the lack of like transparency, the lack of I'm naked and I'm not ashamed. You can see me. I show you myself. You show me yourself. And we go, I accept you. And I don't exploit you. I don't use your weaknesses against you. So my wife and I can be in the same space, and I know that no matter what I am, no matter what I've done, no matter how I might have hurt her or somebody else, she says, I forgive you, or that's okay. Your humanness is safe with me. And when that's in place, man, then the intimacy moves forward, the connection moves forward, the physical affection and the culminating in the sexual experience is beautiful, wonderful. And then we get fulfillment from it. And we don't have anything, there's nothing to hide from. And you don't feel shame when it's over, like we do after we maybe go looking at porn, or lusting. And we all walk away from that going, and I did it, but I feel awful about it afterwards, and it doesn't give me the thing I'm looking for.
Yeah, unsatisfied, unfulfilled.
Yeah, and sometimes bitterness or resentment, towards our wives, because we may tell ourselves, "Well, I had to do it because she wouldn't have sex with me."
Anything you'd add to that, Jason? Thoughts?
Yeah. Like when I'm in session with somebody and you get into some of the practicality of physiological aspects, if a man hasn't had a sexual release in a long time, like what to do with that, to meet someone where they're at, to explore their ethics, and their sense of morality and the purpose of sex, and that I think that is something to explore, like maybe with an individual therapist. Like, what does that look like to you? If you and your partner or spouse are traveling and you got all kinds of things going on, like and someone's like, I'm struggling with this issue, pornography, sexual release in that regard. How can I manage it or work through it? I would say that that's a good point of conversation, to talk to your partner and be like, what is the meaning of having a sexual release? And I know I'm speaking in kind of vague terms. I guess I don't know how
how raw to be.
how raw to be. Yeah, that's
Right.
kind of my hesitation.
Yeah, we're still figuring that out.
I will say, to piggyback on what Tim was saying, there is a sense of, like Tim was talking about, the nakedness and being seen, being known. That is one of the draws of pornography, is that this person on the screen or in the picture, they are naked. We're quote unquote knowing them, but there's no risk involved, right?
Yeah.
It's like we can have it all with none of the risk of potential rejection. And it's very soothing. It's not just the sexual release. It's this whole experience of having someone, at least it seems like it in the moment, they desire me.
Right.
They are accepting me, and they're not going to reject me. They don't resent me. They're not going to make fun of me if I don't do this or that, or I have done that or that. It's like, they are interested in me. They're taking time for me. And it's the whole process of that dynamic. When I work with men, I work with a lot of men too. Like, we talk about not just a sexual release when looking at porn, but the whole dynamic of being alone, being hidden, opening up your computer or phone, finding the pictures or whatever you're looking at, and like what that is like on a psychological level in terms of all of that, and how that is soothing for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the whole looking at pornography experience is over, the loneliness is incredible. And so is the shame.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, okay. And when you can help someone see some of that dynamic, they may not be able to just like stop compulsively looking at pornography, but they will understand maybe more of what their true needs are, which can be helpful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back to the kind of the premise of the pain that someone's feeling, and maybe you guys can talk to us as men or individuals practically of when I find myself in that scenario or saying those things to myself, like, well, she's rejected me, or she's not paying attention to me, or she doesn't desire me, or she doesn't want me, or this never happens. This is always this is always this way, kind of that stuff. Like, practically talking ourselves through that, or doing what are some of the alternatives, as opposed, and I would put it in the context of where we rescue ourselves, where I start saying, well, I justify unwanted behavior because, or something that I've told myself I'm not going to do, and so I'll rescue myself or comfort myself in what I would describe as an illegitimate way. Speak to us just in that moment, when we find ourselves going down some of those pathways of self-talk or justification.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'll stop here. Not stop, but interject here a reference to a really good guide by Jay Stringer called Unwanted, a book called Unwanted. That is a great resource. And one of the things that he recommends is to is to engage your fantasy, as engage the need, the story that you are telling yourself. For example, Jason, you just said, you described being with these women, these objects on the screen, and that's an interesting word that we call them objects, because that's exactly what we're doing. We're objectifying. I use that word intentionally.
Yeah,
we're objectifying these women. They're not humans in our experience, and we fantasize, and that word is used intentionally too, because it's just fantasy. But in the fantasy, in the imagination, we create a story that they think a certain thing about us, they feel a certain thing about us, and that takes us back to that story that you just in part used. The stories that we tell ourselves, the justifications that we make of ourselves, Shad, it's all linked together.
Mm-hmm.
And that really goes back into our childhood, into our stories way back before we ever started even looking at pornography, believe it or not. So what we've done is our fantasies, our sexual experiences are about ways that we find to make okay in some way painful experiences from our past, some sort of rejection, abandonment, either repetition of something that happened to us in the past, or reversal of something that's happened to us in the past, and of course some form of dissociation. And so it helps to engage our fantasies, so that they are and ask God into them, to enter them with us. We spend a lot of our energies trying to, for the most part, like manage our lust, right? Lust management. Don't think that way. Don't feel that way. Push that down. And we're probably better off engaging those fantasies and saying, what are they telling me about my own pain, my own story, my own past, that will help me heal from those wounds. I might have taken this a different direction than what you were actually asking.
Well, I do think it speaks to what I'm hearing anyway, is that engage them, not in terms of act on them, but engage them in terms of because the fantasy is a picture of a place where like your needs are met. And I always describe a fantasy as a picture of the future where there's no work or risk involved. There's no risk of pain. So I know it's a fantasy because that's not real life. Whereas a dream and different from a fantasy is a picture of the future where there is risk and work and pain. So it's a more reality-based version of the future. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, what about that fantasy is meeting what need is that attempting to meet or avoid potentially, or what emotion am I avoiding or trying to salve or deny or minimize, is maybe a little bit of what I'm hearing as you describe that. So it becomes more reflective than and because that's the other thing that we do is we start blaming someone else. And this isn't just in the sex department. I need somebody to blame for my pain.
Right.
Somebody did something that caused this and it's not okay. And so I can justify just about anything in response to that. So yeah, I think it fits the scope of that question for sure.
Yeah, when I work with a lot of men, and I personally think there can be a difference between your stereotypical teenage boy who's getting dumped with testosterone when they're 17 years old, 16 years old, or whatever, right? And let's say they masturbate on occasion, right? It's like versus a 32-year-old man who is using pornography and masturbation to live in a fantasy life and avoid. I'm generalizing here, right?
Yeah.
But
sure.
And I tell a lot of the guys that they're concerned about their pornography use. It's like, there are some practical things to do, and you could set up obstacles like addiction cycle. It's like try to break that cycle. If your tendency is to, you're feeling very lonely, that if you are alone for the night with your phone or whatever, like that could be that's a triggering or a tempting place. You can put a filter on your phone. You can do certain things, but that's only one part of it. And I think that is honestly, and every person's different, but the point is to, like you said, Chad, there are certain needs we have. And if pornography is a way for us to kind of live from shame, to avoid the risk of real relationship, the risk of being known, the risk of desiring and being desired, then we can measure or define our spiritual, psychological health not by stopping this, and that is the definition. I'm going to stop looking at pornography, and if I stop doing that, then I have arrived, right? It's be in community, like have relationship. Easier said than done, but form relationships that are vulnerable. Be in some sort of community where you can celebrate and grieve together. Participate in an embodied experience, which we're sexual beings, and so that sexuality is a physical experience as much as a psychological experience. And so be in creation, be moving, be connected with creation, be in healthy relationships, work with a therapist. There's all kinds of things that we can engage in real life with, these types of dynamics, these types of relationships, having these types of experiences that meet those needs, so that the grip that pornography can have on us can lessen. And so then we won't have to focus so much on stopping this behavior, because we're giving ourselves to a real life experience rather than just existing in a fantasy.
That's really good, Jason. Yeah, that's good guidance.
I've heard neurobiologists describe like avoidant goals and the what that does to our brain when we're trying to set an avoidant goal versus an attractional goal. Like I'm attracted to this, I'm trying to avoid that. And what happens in the brain when kind of the loops that we reinforce, the shame narratives we reinforce when we fall into the avoidant trap versus what I'm pursuing. And so I think what y'all are pointing out, and we use the expression a lot, how do I meet legitimate needs in legitimate ways, as opposed to trying to meet them in illegitimate ways. And so this whole, for me, it's like the process of being radically responsible for myself and my own responses, that it's my job to determine what I'm needing and to know how to go pursue it. What is good for me to consume and what is harmful for me to consume, and to take responsibility for that, and so it's, I think the interesting, the conversation obviously is a huge one. That's a conversation that's been happening long before us and will happen long after us. Tim, you made the point earlier that I want to go back to, that when you're in a relationship that's sexually active, the more sex you have, the more you want it. So that seems problematic also in this whole conversation. Can you maybe talk about the science or experience or psychology behind that, and how how we navigate that part of it?
Yeah, in fact, it's like the other opposite, almost the opposite expression of sexual. Maybe it's not the opposite. It's just another way a sexual addiction can show up, and it can actually be in a committed monogamous relationship where two people are having sex regularly, but the male or the female, they're just objectifying the other person. It's not necessarily intimate. It's just, I'm just doing this. And you hear they do it, they have sex regularly, often. And but it's not intimacy. It's just an act. And you get usually, if they come into the office, into a therapy office, one is complaining that it's just something for you, or it's for the other person, and the one who's so pretty much active and aggressive, if you will, pursuing doesn't get it. It's like, what are you talking about? Isn't that good for you, or whatever? There's just a whole lot of denial. And that's the person who very often will then, if somehow there's a break or interference or interruption of that, that guy's tension, I'm assuming it's male, we're talking about men here.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, will go to some other source to get sex, like pornography or just lusting. And it's just indicative of the same thing that Jason was just talking about, because what's missing in their experience, both of them, is the intimacy, it's real connection. And that's what we want to help people find, because that's ultimately what they really want. All of us deep down really want is just to be seen, just to be known. And so biologically, you mentioned that. Sorry. Scientifically, what we're talking about is probably, researchers will tell us it's about dopamine hits. It's like dopamine is that neurotransmitter that produces, or that gives us that experience of kind of ecstasy, that great, wonderful feeling of satisfaction and sort of a sense of euphoria. And what we can get that are everything that it's in terms of advertising today, and the media and your cell phone, or images that are provocative, are designed to give you that little hit of dopamine. I was talking to someone not long ago who said that in his scrolling through Instagram and looking at scantily clad images of women, he says he doesn't necessarily get an erection, he doesn't necessarily masturbate, but he'll just scroll through images. And so, but he was trying to justify it, right? By saying, well, I'm not really aroused. I just look at it and I go, yeah, that's right. But your brain gets this hit of dopamine, bam, bam, bam. So you have to ask yourself, then why do you do it? The dopamine. It just gives you that little bit of hit. It's like gambling does that. Sex does that. Images do that. That little beat, all of your phone messages, like you get that little ding when you get a text message, that little pleasant little ding, most phones, and you go, oh, someone wants to talk to me. You don't even know who it is. You kind of, oh, ding. It's supposed to be, it's a hit of dopamine, right? Unless it's from Shad, and I go, oh, dang it.
Dopamine crashes.
Yeah, not again.
Sorry. Anyway, but that's as much science as you get from me, Shad.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important and fascinating. I think when we break this down, as much as you can, in terms of what is actually happening in our hearts, minds, and brains in the midst of that, like, why does that feel so powerful? Like if I, not wanting to have sex with you, compared to them telling you no about anything else, that in particular is what seems to create a major source of tension, conflict, fighting, et cetera. And I think, Jason, you were alluding to this earlier, is like the foundation of the relationship would you guys say that is indicative of an insecure foundational attachment relationally? Maybe a good way of asking it.
Are you asking, like, say more about that?
If the reaction in a relationship, in a marital relationship, to someone not wanting to have sex with the other, and that creates a significant, maybe maybe even an elevated response that seems bigger than the issue itself, is that indicative of a lack of attachment or secure attachment relationally, or a lack of intimacy relationally?
Yeah, it could very well could be. It could be something as I was talking to a couple the other day, a married couple, and there was a lot going on in their life with like kids and just busy schedules and just overall stress. But one of the dynamics was just a lot of shame that this particular case, the wife had about her body.
Yeah.
And how that was difficult for her to work through and to just be honest about, right? It was our own shame, but also acknowledging that. It was kind of one of those things, like she felt shame about her body, but then she felt ashamed of saying that to her husband because she felt silly.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about it in session, right? And it's just like, I think deep down, she wanted to know that I'm okay, like that I am, my husband still desires me and I'm still desirable, even though the craziness of life has caused me to not be as happy with how I look. And it's just being the more secure attachment is when, not that we always feel good about our relationship, but that when we don't, we feel safe enough, not certain. The point isn't to be certain. The point is to be confident enough to take that risk, to name this vulnerable, potentially painful thought, emotion, because we are putting ourselves out there for our partner to then soothe us and comfort us. So that's the way forward, is to not always feel positive. But to, when we don't feel hopeful, when we don't feel confident, when we don't feel, like everything's working well for us, to be able to talk about it in some way. And yeah, is that what you were getting at, Shad?
Absolutely. And I think you raise another interesting point that if someone does not want to engage, or if they deny my request or advances, that is not always about me.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's the other thing. I think you, like, for a mature kind of relationally developed response to being told no, just in anything, it doesn't mean it isn't about you all the time, isn't about me all the time. So I think that's a point that often gets overlooked in the midst of some of this conversation too. So I think that's really, really good. I think as we could go on with this, and this is such I think it's just such a worthwhile conversation, because I think it just emerges so many things relationally to the surface that are worth considering. But let's go back to that whole idea of needs, and needs versus, maybe wants, or I don't know what the other side of that category may be. So can one of you guys weigh in more on that, and how, the sex in particular is unique in that without it, you're not going to die?
Yeah. Well, I will put it this way. This is, I think Jason really did a good job of trying to tie those two things together. That, what does it mean? It's kind of like, it's not a need like all of us think of as, like I mentioned before, food, shelter, water. But relationally, it is a need, or it's essential to those who are in, God-ordained relationships, romantic relationships. Okay. So, and by that, I mean, Well, but even saying that immediately comes to mind, like, but there have to be exceptions. So it's not a need. It's like, what if we all know of romantic situations, marriage situations where it's just not possible to have sex, and those couples are not to be, we can't put them in a category that they're not getting their needs met because they can't have sex. We could, because of physiological reasons, biological reasons, they can't. So they can still have a fulfilled marriage, a fulfilled life together. So it's not that. But under normal circumstances, all things being equal, we would say it's essential to a healthy relationship because it is natural. One of the things that's helpful to understand is something called not just like God's laws or commandments, but natural law. Something someone could look into. Maybe we could have a discussion on that sometime. But natural law says, for example, that if you move into a relationship with someone romantically, and you're going to be committed to them for the rest of your life, then it is natural for you to have a sexual experience with them. That is just the way God designed it. And then under normal conditions, you're going to make babies. Like, okay, that's natural law, right? But it doesn't mean that if you don't have babies, for example, that somehow you are violating God's law. But that's just the way things work. So it's a little bit fuzzy, and I appreciate that. I hope you do. But I think for the sake of this whole conversation, for people who get so trapped in this lie, I think there's just this lie that too many men and women believe, for the sake of discussion, of argument, it is not a need in that strictest sense. I must have sex or else. I think that's a lie we have to just confront.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like this, but it as a need and not as a need. I would say, like, overall, in terms of human civilization, it is a need for our for our species to continue. So that's there, but for an individual, it's not a survival need.
Yeah,
right. There's a story, and I'm not going to say too much about it because I'll probably butcher it. But the idea is there was someone who had, whether they were lost on an island. Why do I have balloons on there?
I don't know. That's just. I think there's an AI. There's some kind of AI deal going because you had a thumbs up earlier. I was like, "Where's that coming from?"
There's a ghost machine.
Yeah, I don't know.
Was like, did I hit a button?
Oh man. Okay.
I loved it.
So there's a story of someone who was like lost it. Their plane had crashed and they were lost in the fort, which actually happened to some kids, I think, in South America the other day. But anyway, someone rescued them finally. And because of that, this person helped them survive, right? They rescued them and they were given food, water, shelter. But when they talked about the trauma of the experience, this person turned away, like they didn't want to deal with that part, right? And so, but when you get into trauma, you get into shame and you get into healing, right? There's broken parts of us that we don't necessarily need them to be healed for us to survive, but they need to be healed so that we can thrive, so that we can live a healthy, meaningful life. And that's where sex comes in. Not that sex is the direct, if we're having sex, we're thriving. Mm-hmm. It's really the what sex is maybe a culmination of, or the meaning of it, and that is connection with others, being known, knowing, being desired, desiring, accepting ourselves, accepting others in nakedness, those types of things, intimacy through vulnerability. That is more so than just being rescued from the wilderness or the island so that we have basic necessities. That's where it begins, but we're meant to go on there and name our traumas, and someone, instead of turning away, they turn toward, and to be seen and known in that way. And I think in a particular kind of relationship, sex is a pretty powerful and prominent expression of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's a need in that way.
Mm-hmm. I really love y'all's handling of all this and treatment of it and consideration and thoughtfulness of it. I think if I can attempt to kind of summarize, I guess, what we've been trying to, working towards, I think what I would say, and this has been beneficial for me, is that if you find yourself being really activated or dysregulated when you are told no, or when you are not, when you are not, your pursuit is not reciprocated or received. If you're finding yourself being really activated in that, there's something to explore there. Like, there's a deeper question that I think is worth considering that may lead to more healing. Like, Jason, I think what the point you're making is like turning toward, like, what's driving that? What is it about this that feels so intolerable to me? And is there something for me to consider or explore? I think it also, another great question that comes up is like, am I using sex or am I making love? Like, am I using sex as this thing, and thus using my partner and wife or spouse as this thing as a coping mechanism because of how powerful it is, to your point about the dopamine release, and it's effective, like it's powerful. But am I using that, or is it this kind of beautiful expression that, Jason, you guys have both described, that I'm free to experience in that context? I mean, I think so. It's a really rich, there's lots of opportunity, I think, to invite us into thinking about it. And even, you could even say on the other side of the coin, if you're the one that feels resistant to those advances, exploring, to what is that about? Like, why is that so hard what am I experiencing when I feel so resistant to that interest in me or that pursuit? There's probably some very legitimate needs there that could be explored. So a really, really rich conversation. Hopefully those who are listening find it beneficial, and obviously Kardia is available to guide more of those conversations in person or otherwise. So thank you guys so much for letting me put you on the spot and entering that. Any closing remarks, anything you have a burning desire to share or say before we wrap up?